poor cleaning lady helps an old woman, never imagining she was the mother of the boss who humiliated her. Maria would arrive home carrying on her back the weight of the day, her soul washed in soap and humiliation. Every day, she cleaned the luxurious office while listening to cruel jokes from her boss, a cold man who even mocked the cheap soap smell on her apron. But that late afternoon, fate crossed her path with an elderly woman who had fallen on the sidewalk, alone and invisible to everyone else's eyes. Without thinking twice, Maria reached out her hand, took the lady home, gave her shelter, food, and affection, without knowing that this fragile woman was hiding the biggest secret of her life. And it was there, in the silence of that simple home, that a bond stronger than blood began to form. A gesture of kindness that would turn into an unimaginable twist, capable of breaking down the pride of an arrogant boss and revealing that true wealth doesn't live in the pocket, but in the heart. And that's where our story begins. The night arrived heavy, full of distant noises, barking dogs, hurried footsteps in the alley. But inside that humble house, the silence felt like a temple. Maria woke up before the rooster crowed, just as she had since the days when she shared a bed with her late husband. She got up slowly, her knees creaking like an old door, ran her hand over her face, and looked at the boy wrapped in a thin sheet. Then she turned to the makeshift mattress in the corner, where the old woman slept, with her hair spread out, looking like a tired child after playing all day. The first ray of sunlight came through a crack in the roof, and fell on the old woman's wrinkled face. She slowly opened her eyes, blinking like someone returning from a long dream. The smell of freshly brewed coffee was already filling the air, mixed with the scent of soap from the bucket Maria always kept in the corner. The boy, curious, was already awake, holding his little wooden toy car. He approached carefully, looked at the old woman, and, in a shy gesture, showed her the toy as if he was sharing a secret. The old woman smiled. It was a small smile, but it lit up her tired face as if the sun had suddenly turned on inside her. Seeing that smile, Maria felt her chest warm in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. She picked up an aluminum mug, filled it with hot porridge, and took it to the old woman. Before handing it over, she blew on it, as if blowing a blessing. The woman held the mug with trembling hands, looked at Maria as if wanting to say something, but no words came out. The silence was full of things no one knew how to name. After the porridge, Maria brought a basin with warm water. She sat on the floor, took the old woman's cracked feet, and washed them carefully, removing the dust from the streets, the calluses from a lifetime. She wiped them as if in prayer, softly humming a song she had learned from her mother when she was a little girl working in the fields. The boy watched quietly, hugging his toy car to his chest, his eyes shining with a mix of wonder and reverence. When she finished, Maria combed the old woman's white hair with an old comb, missing some teeth. Each strand seemed to release a memory, a sigh, a hidden prayer. The old woman breathed deeply, closed her eyes, and gently rested her face in Maria's hand, as if finding a lap she hadn't had in years. It was the first time in a long while that she smiled without fear. The smile wasn't just on her lips but also in the way she held the mug, the look she gave the boy, and the way she sighed like someone who finally finds refuge. Maria watched it all with a feeling hard to explain. On one hand, she felt pain imagining how much loneliness was stored in those fragile bones. On the other, she felt a gentle joy, a sense of purpose she never found in her dirty uniform or her boss's scoldings. That morning was different. There was no expensive coffee, no French perfume, no fluffy carpet. There was the smell of boiling corn, the sound of chickens scratching in the yard, and a warmth of humanity that no mansion could ever buy. The boy approached, held the old woman's hand, and started singing a little circle song he had heard on the street. The old woman, surprised, smiled again and joined in, her voice weak but steady, as if awakening a forgotten piece of her soul. Maria, standing by the stove, holding a spoon, watched the two of them, feeling the tears come slowly, warm like the porridge in the pot. It was as if, suddenly, the emptiness of the house had been filled with stories, memories, and life. When the song ended, the old woman ran her hand over the boy's face, gently smoothing his hair. She looked at Maria and, in a low voice, said, "It's been so long since someone treated me like a human being." Maria swallowed hard. She didn't answer. She just pressed her apron to her chest, as if holding her heart so it wouldn't fall out. Outside, the day was waking up, the sound of neighbors rising, a small radio playing somewhere, the sweep of a broom elsewhere. But inside the house, it felt like time had stopped. The boy went back to playing on the floor, carefully pushing his toy car so as not to wake the dreams of his new grandma. Maria cooked a modest pot of beans, singing softly, while the old woman looked at every detail, every crooked nail on the wall, every crack on the floor, as if studying a sacred map. That first morning, Maria didn't yet know that the old woman carried a past as heavy as the sacks of dirty clothes she washed every week. She didn't know that, right there, a seed of change was being planted that no one could have imagined. But what Maria did know, and that was everything, is that in that poorhouse, among old pans and worn-out sheets, love had already started to grow. In that moment, as the old woman smiled and the boy imitated birds in the yard, Maria was certain that the greatest wealth in life isn't what you can keep in your pocket, but what you can share in your heart. And that morning, her heart was fuller than ever. The next morning, after that first different dawn, Maria woke up with an aching body but a light spirit. The house was still quiet. The boy slept hugging his little wooden car, and the old woman snored softly in the corner, holding a piece of cloth as if it were a silk pillow. Maria looked at them tenderly, feeling her chest fill with a warmth that came not from the stove nor from the sun outside. Before leaving, she adjusted the old woman's sheet, left a mug of water by the mattress, and gave the boy a gentle kiss on the forehead. She put on her worn-out uniform, tied the scarf on her head, and left with the empty bucket in her hand, like someone going to war without a sword. The street was still damp with dew, the birds were singing, but Maria walked with firm steps, her head held high, different from every other day. When she arrived at the big office gate, she took a deep breath. The gate was heavy, painted white, but already stained with dust and neglect. She went in, feeling the curious stares of her co-workers. Some giggled quietly, others just looked away. To them, Maria was just another shadow, a walking rag, but that day, she seemed to shine. Even if only she knew it. The hallway smelled of imported perfume, reheated coffee, and poorly hidden pride. The boss, Dr. Edmilson, was sitting in his leather chair, his tie-crooked papers scattered on the desk. As soon as he saw Maria, he frowned, tapping his finger impatiently on the wood. "Late again, you useless woman," he shouted without looking up from his paper. Maria took a deep breath, pressed the bucket against her body, holding back her words like someone holding a sharp knife. The boss stood up, walked over to her, his face red, veins pulsing in his neck. "If you break another cup, I'll deduct it from your pay. Do you think soap gives you permission to be clumsy?" he said, pushing a box roughly. Maria trembled inside, but on the outside, she kept her face calm. She thought of the old woman's smile, of the boy singing his little song, of the smell of hot porridge that still seemed to float in the air. That memory was an invisible shield, protecting her from each word like stones. The other workers watched, from a distance, pretending to arrange papers or clean counters. No one dared to defend her. There, each one was a prisoner of their own fear. Maria lowered her head, picked up the rag, and started cleaning the corners, careful not to make noise, so as not to attract more fury. With each step, she felt the weight of humiliation spread across her back, but at the same time, a new strength spread through her heart. While scrubbing the bathroom, she remembered the moment she combed the old woman's white hair. She remembered that weak voice saying, "It's been so long since someone treated me like a human being." That echoed louder in Maria's mind than any of her boss's shouts. Because even though she was called useless, she knew that at home, someone saw her as an angel, and no one could take that away. The clock seemed stuck, the sound of the phone ringing, heels in the hallway, the clinking of cups. Everything blended into a buzz that hurt her ears. But Maria kept going, strong. She cleaned every corner as if she were washing away the world's pain. And deep down, she prayed to God for strength to endure another day without letting her heart turn to stone. At lunchtime, Maria ate her mortadella sandwich in a hidden corner, sitting on the back step. The sun shone directly on her, but she didn't care. She closed her eyes, remembered the old woman having porridge, the boy's smile. In those few seconds, she found rest, even if her body was exhausted. When she finished, she washed her hands slowly, feeling the water run like a thread of life. She looked up at the sky, murmured softly, "Thank you, God, for giving me courage. Even when everything pushes me down, you hold me up." In the afternoon, while scrubbing the main hallway floor, she heard the boss yelling on the phone. He shouted, slammed the desk, talked about business, money, targets. Maria passed by, almost invisible, but she heard when he said, "These simple people are only good for cleaning up the mess. They're leftovers, and leftovers have no voice." Maria gripped the rag tightly. She felt her face heat up. Inside her, a river of pain mixed with revolt rose to her chest. But instead of exploding, she took a deep breath. She thought of the old woman, thought of the boy. She knew dignity didn't live in the words of a bitter man, but in the small gestures done with a whole heart. When the workday ended, Maria quietly said goodbye, picked up her bucket and rag, and left through the gate. She walked slowly, each step heavy with the day's memories, but also with hope. Because despite the shouting, despite the contempt, she knew there was a warm corner waiting at home. A corner where a smile was worth more than any fancy rug, where a mug of porridge was more precious than all the office's imported coffee. At the corner, Maria stopped, closed her eyes, felt the wind on her face, the sound of cars, the smell of dust, the distant call of a mother calling her child. Everything blended into a single thought. Life humiliates me here, but it blesses me there. And at that moment, Maria knew that even the heaviest work couldn't steal the joy blooming within the poor walls of her home. A whole day of yelling, insults, and dirt could never erase the glow of a single true smile. His son was already hiding when Maria pushed open the wooden gate, which creaked like an old lady complaining about life. The smell of burnt beans filled the street, barefoot kids played soccer, and chickens pecked at food scraps in the yards. When she entered the house, the first thing she saw was the boy sitting on the packed earth floor beside the old woman, his eyes shining like someone listening to a fairy tale. The old woman was holding a piece of old, faded, hand-stitched fabric and telling stories from when she was a girl in the countryside, about waking up to roosters crowing and falling asleep to the sound of the wind rustling the thatched roof. She spoke of harvest festivals, long walks to the local shop, and clay pots that held the taste of childhood. The boy listened with his mouth slightly open, holding his little wooden car, swaying as if wanting to dance with the words. Maria dropped the bucket in the corner, leaned against the wall, and watched. She felt a lump in her throat. It was as if she were watching a play written for her soul. That boy, who used to run wild through the streets, now sat still, quiet, drinking in each sentence as if it were fresh water on a dry day. At one point, the old woman paused, took a deep breath, and began singing an old children's circle song. Her voice was weak, broken by time, but there was a hidden strength there, a deep root pulling memories from the earth. The boy suddenly stood up, clapped his hands, spun around her, making awkward little dance steps. His laughter filled the house, crossed the walls, spilled into the yard like a good breeze that announces rain. Maria couldn't hold back her tears. She felt a longing for her own mother, the woman who rocked her to the beat of drums and old stories. She missed the advice whispered by the stove, the smell of baked cornmeal, learning to pray by looking at the moon. But there, seeing her son find a grandmother of the heart, the emptiness seemed to fill. It was as if God was stitching a new family together, using invisible threads of affection. The boy started calling the old woman Grandma of the Heart. It was spontaneous, unplanned, unasked. He just said it, like someone freeing a caged bird. The old woman trembled, put her hand on her chest, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't answer with words, she simply opened her arms, and the boy dove into the hug, as if finding shelter after a storm. From that day on, the house's routine changed. While Maria left early for work, the boy stayed glued to the old woman. They planted bean seeds in the yard, played at guessing cloud shapes, cooked cornmeal cakes on the griddle. The old woman taught him small prayers that mixed old blessings with folk songs. She said each word was like a brick in the house of faith. One late afternoon, sitting on the doorstep, the old woman told of when she had to leave her own home because of fights among siblings, of the times she ate only flour and water, of the nights she cried quietly so her children wouldn't hear. The boy, serious, held her hand tightly. He didn't understand it all, but he felt her pain through the touch, as if his heart were a board where she could hammer nails and pull out splinters. One night, while Maria washed clothes at the sink, she heard the boy ask, "Grandma, why were you alone on the street?" The old woman stayed silent. She looked up at the sky, sighed deeply, and answered, "Because the world is big, but some people's hearts are too small to hold a mother." The phrase echoed, hammering the walls, sticking to the ceiling like a hard truth to swallow. Maria stopped scrubbing, wiped her hands on her skirt, went to them, and sat beside them. She joined their hands in hers, as if sealing a pact. They sat there, the three of them, looking into the dark, listening to the distant sound of an old radio playing a slow drumbeat. Little by little, the old woman became a root in that house. She was no longer a guest. She was floor, roof, embrace. When the boy got sick, she was the one who put a warm hand on his forehead, murmured prayers, and whispered words that felt like medicine. When Maria came home tired, she was the one who offered herbal tea, who held Maria's face in both hands, looking deep, as if seeing her soul. In the neighborhood, people started talking. They said Maria had become the old woman's daughter of the heart, and the boy was now her borrowed grandson. Some mocked, others admired. But inside those crooked walls, no one cared about gossip. Their love spread like a vine, filling every crack. In that bond between the boy and the old woman, Maria found the answer to so many questions fate had never bothered to explain. She understood that sometimes family is born from care, not blood, and that broken hearts recognize each other in silence, in the smell of porridge, in the palm of a hand offered without hesitation. At the end of each night, when everything was silent, Maria stood on the doorstep, watching the two of them sleeping. The boy curled up around the old woman's leg like a puppy snuggling against its mother. She took a deep breath, feeling that, even after so much pain, there was a miracle happening there, slowly stitched into each small gesture. And in that quiet, Maria whispered to herself, God hasn't forgotten us. He just takes his time, but when he comes with tenderness. The sun had barely risen when Maria opened her eyes that morning. The smell of weak coffee drifted through the kitchen, mixed with the rhythmic sound of the boy playing in the yard, pushing his little wooden car that had more patches than paint. Maria looked toward the corner where the old woman usually slept, expecting to see the crumpled sheet, her white hair spread out on the makeshift pillow. But the mattress was empty, smooth, as if no one had slept there that night. Maria's heart beat differently, a dry, anxious thump. She went to the bathroom, opened the door slowly, and called softly, Mother, are you there? Silence. She ran to the yard, looked behind the sink, near the papaya tree, but only found the boy, who looked at her curiously. Maria went back inside, sat down on the floor, running her hands over her head, trying to search her memory for any warning, any word that might explain that absence. The boy ran in, holding the old woman's worn-out slipper. His eyes trembled, his lower lip quivered, as if tears were ready to burst. He held the slipper to his chest, clutching it like a treasure. Mama, where's Grandma of the heart? The question fell to the floor like a glass cup. Maria couldn't answer. She simply pulled the boy onto her lap, hugged him tightly, while his tears soaked the sleeve of her uniform. Without waiting, Maria stood up, opened the gate, and went out into the street. The boy followed, holding the slipper. They walked through the neighborhood, asked the neighbor sweeping her sidewalk, the butcher adjusting the hooks, the woman at the grocery store arranging onions on the stand. No one knew, no one had seen. The silence in their answers hurt more than any harsh word. Maria walked hurriedly, her bare feet on the hot dirt, her face covered in sweat and fear. The boy ran behind her, whimpering, stumbling over stones. At each corner, Maria shouted the name she didn't fully know yet, the name that now sounded like that of a true mother. In her mind, a whole movie played. The conversations on the doorstep, the circle songs, the smell of herbal tea, the exchanged smiles at dawn. She thought of the loneliness in the old woman's eyes, the pain hidden in her trembling hands. She wondered if maybe the old woman had felt like a burden, had decided to leave so she wouldn't be in the way. That thought cut like a knife. They returned home with shaky legs, spinning heads, and empty chests. The boy dropped the slipper on the floor and threw himself onto the mattress, sobbing. Maria stood in the middle of the room, staring at nothing, feeling a hole open up inside her. It was a silence that screamed. The house, once full of songs and laughter, now felt like a cold cave. In the kitchen, Maria tried to cook beans, but her hand trembled. The spoon clanged against the pot like a church bell. She stopped, dropped everything, sat on the floor, and cried. She cried like she hadn't since her husband's funeral, when she had gripped the coffin with both hands and felt the world collapse. At that moment, the boy came over, knelt beside her, and held her hand gently. Mama, Grandma is coming back. right?" he asked in a weak voice, his eyes wet. Maria tried to smile, but the smile came out crooked, sad, torn. She ran her hand over the boy's face, pulled him to her chest, kissed his forehead, and simply said, "We will wait." It was a simple sentence but carried a promise, a hope that still flickered like a candle in the wind. The hours dragged. On that day, the boy sat on the doorstep, watching the street, like someone waiting for a father to return from the fields. Maria swept the yard non-stop, picking up leaves that didn't even exist, trying to occupy her mind. Every now and then, she looked at the gate, imagining she'd see the fragile figure of the old woman appear with her torn bag on her arm. But the gate stayed silent. Still. At night, the boy insisted on sleeping on the mattress, where the old woman used to stay. He said he wanted to keep her place. Maria agreed. She covered him, sat beside him, running her hand through his hair until he fell asleep. Then she stayed there, staring into the dark, praying softly, asking God to bring the old woman back. Between one sigh and another, she remembered the words the old woman had once said, "The world is big, but some people's hearts are too small to hold a mother." That night, Maria understood that her greatest fear wasn't losing her job, or facing the bosses shouting. The greatest fear was losing that bond that had formed, that family that had sprouted from dust, from nothing. Feeling that emptiness was like having the ground pulled out from under her feet. And she, so used to fighting, now found herself on her knees, begging the sky for an answer. While the boy slept, hugging the slipper, Maria looked up at the ceiling, listening to the night sounds of the neighborhood. A dog barking in the distance, the neighbor's old radio, the wind knocking against a hanging can. Each noise felt like an unanswered question, and in the middle of that noisy silence, Maria understood that true love leaves a space no one else can fill. In that moment, she promised herself she wouldn't give up. Even without knowing where to look, even without strength in her feet, she would keep waiting. Because those who learn to love truly also learn to wait, even if it hurts. Even if the world says it's pointless. Dawn arrived slowly, heavy with low clouds, as if the sky itself was in mourning. Maria got up before the rooster crowed, her body tired, her soul even more so. The boy remained curled up on the mattress, hugging the old woman's worn-out slipper, breathing unevenly, as if dreaming about something he didn't want to wake from. Maria ran her hand through his hair, adjusted the blanket, and left without making a sound. The gate creaked, exposing the pain she carried tight in her chest. On the way, the street felt longer, the world colder. The bucket knocked against her leg, marking every step left to reach the office. Her mind spun like clothes in a wash basin. Where would she be now? Had she eaten? Was she cold? Was she lying on some sidewalk, like the first day they met? Each question felt like a stone in her shoe, but Maria kept going, because she knew work didn't wait for a heart to heal. When she arrived at the office, the gate was wide open, unlike every other day. Employees were running everywhere. Papers flew, broken cups littered the floor. Maria walked in slowly, holding the bucket tighter than ever. She felt that something big had happened, something fate had been stitching together silently for a long time. In the main hallway, Dr. Edmilson, the boss who always humiliated her, was standing, his face red, eyes wide open. His tie hung, crooked round his neck, as if choking what little dignity he had left. He was shouting, gesturing wildly, pushing tables and chairs. "My mother is gone. She's gone," he screamed, spitting the words as if spitting fire. Maria froze. The bucket nearly fell from her hand. Her body turned cold. The air grew heavy, hard to breathe. "Mother," he repeated, louder each time, more desperate. The hallway filled with voices. Employees whispered, exchanged looks. The boss's mother. He had a mother. A woman from accounting asked, hand over her mouth. "He never mentioned her," murmured a man, pushing a stack of folders. Maria felt her legs weaken. Her head spun like a windmill, piecing everything together. The old woman, the silences, the distant gaze, the stories that ended mid-sentence. The truth stood there, raw and bare. The old woman she had welcomed was the mother of that man, the man who spat hatred in every sentence, who mocked the soap on her uniform, who treated people like dust. Dr. Edmilson collapsed to his knees in the middle of the hallway, papers scattered around him like dry leaves. He grabbed his head, pulled at his hair, hit the floor. A hoarse sob escaped, a sound that seemed to come from deep inside, heavy as a millstone. Maria stood still, motionless, the bucket trembling in her hand. Inside her, a storm of emotions: pity, anger, compassion, indignation, all mixed together like cornmeal batter rushed by hand. She wanted to run, scream, shake that man and say, she was there, longing for your embrace. She needed you, and you only knew how to shout. But she stayed silent, because she knew that sometimes silence speaks louder than any scream. The employees stepped back. Some cried, others just watched from afar, as if witnessing a tragic play. The phone rang non-stop, but no one answered. Coffee cooled in abandoned cups. The entire office felt like a stage for tragedy, each actor forgetting their lines. Edmilson got up with difficulty, walked to his office, and slammed the door shut. The glass trembled. Silence spread. Maria stayed in the hallway, eyes fixed on the closed door. She could hear inside, muffled crying, furniture being pushed, stumbling steps. It was the sound of guilt gnawing at his soul, the sound of someone realizing, too late, that money doesn't buy a mother's lap, that status doesn't buy forgiveness. But Maria dropped the bucket in the corner, leaned against the wall. Her hands were sweaty, her heart racing. She remembered the boy, the way he ran into the old woman's lap, the circle song she sang. She remembered the words, "The world is big, but some people's hearts are too small to hold a mother." There, in the middle of that cold hallway, Maria understood that the boss, with all his wealth, was poorer than her, because she, even with a dirt floor, an old pot, and a sweaty uniform, had a house full of love, and he, with all his pomp, was alone, clinging to papers and empty walls. Some employees began to leave, shaking their heads, murmuring quiet prayers. Others avoided looking at Maria, as if afraid her eyes might reveal secrets buried deep inside. She took a deep breath, picked up the bucket, and went to the storeroom, where she sat on a crate and cried softly. She cried for Edmilson, she cried for the old woman, she cried for herself, because she knew the world was cruel to those who love too much, and to those who don't know how to love at all. In the middle of her tears, she felt a strength sprout, a gentle but firm certainty. The truth, sooner or later, appears. Goodness, even when silent, triumphs. And God's justice never misses an address. The sun dripped down the office roof tiles as Maria went out to dump the dirty water. Her legs still trembled, her heart beat like a drum on the day of a sad festival. The hallway remained silent, the air heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Maria passed through the big gate, felt the heat burn her face, but didn't care. She needed to feel the outside world, needed a sign, any breeze to remind her that life existed beyond humiliations and screams. Outside, the street carried on. Street vendors shouted prices for wilted vegetables. Kids ran barefoot after old tires. Mothers called their children back inside. But in the middle of that familiar chaos, Maria saw something that made her body freeze. There she was, right at the office gate, the old woman, her dress wrinkled, a torn bag on her arm, and on her face, a smile so wide it looked like an embrace. In her eyes, a shine that carried secrets bigger than the world. Next to her, a small bag full of colorful candies wrapped in simple paper. Maria put her hand over her mouth, tears running freely. She ran toward the old woman, her heart pounding faster than her steps. When she got close, she stopped, looked deep into the old woman's eyes, as if checking if it was a dream or real. The old woman opened her arms, and Maria threw herself into them like a daughter returning to her mother's lap after a long journey. "I went to buy some candies for my grandson of the heart," said the old woman, her voice weak but firm, holding the bag with care. Maria sobbed, words lost between tears and relief. The boy appeared, running from across the street, barefoot, dust rising behind him. When he saw the old woman, he screamed so loudly that the neighbors stopped in their tracks. He ran, stumbled, got up, and finally dove into her arms. The old woman held him tight, kissed his forehead, ran her hand through his hair. It was a reunion that seemed to carry all the unspoken goodbyes in the world. People started to gather on the sidewalk, curious. They whispered to each other, pointed, trying to understand that scene that mixed pain, tenderness, and a mystery bigger than any gossip. Then Dr. Edmilson appeared at the gate, his eyes swollen, his face pale, his body bent as if carrying a sack of stones on his back. When he saw his mother, he stood frozen, silent. For a few seconds, the whole world stopped too. The car noises, the birdsong, everything seemed to hush. Edmilson took a step, then another, his gaze fixed on his mother. His mouth trembled, his hands moved aimlessly. He started running toward her, like a boy desperate for a mother's embrace. But before he could reach her, the old woman turned, grabbed Maria's hand, and pulled the boy closer. "Mother, forgive me," Edmilson cried, falling to his knees in the street dust. "Come home, please, I'll take you right now." The old woman looked at him with a calmness sharper than any shout. Her silence was a sentence. Edmilson stretched out his hands, begging, but the old woman slowly shook her head. "You forgot what it means to care. You forgot that a mother isn't a trophy, isn't a piece of furniture to decorate a living room." Her voice came out slow, as if each word were a nail hammered into wood. Edmilson wept like a child, his body swaying, dust sticking to his expensive suit. The whole neighborhood watched, pressed against gates, some with hands on their chests, others holding back tears. It was a scene no one could have imagined. The rich, powerful man thrown into the dirt, and the mother, fragile but so giant she seemed to hold up the sky. The old woman held Maria's face, wiped her tears with her thumb, and smiled. Then she looked at the boy, handed him the bag of candies, and said, "I went to find a gift for you. I didn't want to come back empty-handed." The boy held the bag as if holding a crown, hugging the old woman with all the strength his little body could muster. Maria looked at Edmilson but said nothing. Her silence was louder than any sermon. The old woman then turned to her son, who remained kneeling. She looked at him with wet eyes, but without a hint of trembling. "This woman here," she said, pointing at Maria, "gave me what you never knew how to give, care. And care is worth more than a big house, a car, or all the money in the world." Edmilson lowered his head, his forehead touching the ground. His crying turned into sobs, his entire body shook. The neighbors began to drift away, some whispering prayers, others shaking their heads silently, understanding that, on that street, a rich man had just lost the only true wealth he ever had. Maria held the old woman's hand, squeezing it gently. In that squeeze, she felt a promise, a strength that couldn't be bought or sold. The boy hugged them both at the same time, as if he wanted to piece back together the parts of the world that had been shattered. In that reunion, no one left the same. The street, so often the stage for empty laughter, now witnessed the greatest lesson of all. True love can't be begged for, can't be bought, can't be shouted. It is planted in silence, and when it blooms, it lights up even the darkest corners of the soul. Edmilson remained on his knees, his face buried in the hot dust, his expensive suit stained like a rag forgotten in the yard. His hands trembled, grabbing handfuls of dirt, as if trying to hold on to a past slipping through his fingers. Around him, people watched, some in absolute silence, others murmuring quiet prayers. Maria, with the boy on one side and the old woman on the other, stood still, her eyes fixed on that scene that hurt, and, at the same time, set her free. The old woman took a deep breath, pulling in the air like someone bracing for a storm. She walked slowly toward her son, each step heavy, as if she carried an entire world on her back. When she got close, she reached out her hand, but not to caress. She passed her hand lightly through the air, almost touching his head, but then pulled back. "Get up, my son." Her voice came out gentle but firm as stone. "The ground won't give you back what you lost inside. In your heart." Edmilson slowly raised his head, his eyes swollen, his unshaven face, his pride shattered. He tried to grab the hem of her dress, but she pulled it away gently, like someone untying an old knot. "Mother, I." The words tangled, dying in his throat. He opened his mouth, but only sobs came out. The old woman knelt down to his level, looked deep into his eyes, those same eyes that once saw life for the first time in her hands. "You forgot that a mother isn't a medal to hang on a wall, or a trophy to show off to others. A mother is a root. When you cut the root, the tree might still stand, but it dries up inside." She spoke each word as if planting cassava in hard soil, her hands firm but also full of love. Edmilson shook, trying to hold her dress again. "I did everything to give you a good life, a house, food, security," he babbled, tears falling like heavy rain on a tin roof. "A good life." The old woman shook her head, laughing without joy. "A good life isn't a soft bed or a full plate. A good life is feeling your child's hand when your leg gives out. It's hearing 'I love you' without having to ask. It's a sincere hug at the end of the day." The neighbors drew closer, but no one dared interrupt. It was as if the air itself was suspended, waiting for each word to hit the ground and take root. Maria squeezed the boy's hand, who watched everything with wide eyes, as if witnessing something sacred. The boy understood, even if he couldn't explain. He understood that love isn't the sound of coins, nor the smell of imported perfume. Love is a full silence, a small gesture that shouts louder than any speech. The old woman pointed at Maria, her finger firm. This woman here, the one you humiliated so much, gave me everything I needed. She washed my feet as if she were my daughter, combed my hair as if she were my mother. She had nothing, but gave me everything. Her voice was now like a gentle thunder, echoing through the soul's walls. Edmilson looked at Maria, his eyes full of shame. He tried to speak, but choked on his own guilt. His silence weighed more than any insult he had ever hurled. Maria said nothing. She just looked at him, firm, her face serene but her eyes wet. It was as if she were saying, "I see who you really are now." The old woman caressed Maria's face, pulled her close. "Thank you, daughter. Thank you for reminding me what it is to feel human." Then she turned again to Edmilson. "I will not return to that big house. My home is where I am loved, where I am truly seen." And here, I found that Edmilson fell backward, sitting in the dust, hands on his face, rocking like a lost child. His world collapsed, not for lack of money or comfort, but because he realized, too late, that he had become an orphan of a living mother. The old woman, Maria, and the boy stood still. The sun slowly dipped, painting the sky orange, while the entire street watched the most painful and true spectacle they had ever seen. It wasn't a soap opera. It was life. It was the open wound of a man who forgot to water the roots, and now reaped only silence. In that moment, Maria took a deep breath, pulled the old woman by the arm, and started walking. The boy followed close behind, holding tightly to the hem of her dress. The old woman didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had already said everything a mother's heart could say. And Edmilson, left on the ground, clung only to the echo of his own choices. The greatest lesson had been given, not in shouts, but in a silence loaded with truth. The walk back to the village was long, but each step felt like it lit a flame inside Maria. The old woman walked beside her, her wrinkled hand resting on Maria's arm, holding on lightly but also with the firmness of someone who had finally found a place where she belonged. The boy skipped ahead, carefully carrying the bag of candies as if it were a treasure. The sky was already dressing itself in purple and orange, announcing the night, and a gentle breeze blew, taking with it the dust and pain left in front of the office. When they reached Maria's wooden gate, the old woman stopped, looked around, and took a deep breath. She looked at the small yard, the cracked sink, the beaten earth floor marked with sandal prints. She looked at the boy, smiling proudly, showing off the candies, and then at Maria, who looked at her with tearful but serene eyes. It was there, in the simplicity of that cramped ground, that the old woman understood. Love lived in that dust, in that old pot, in the cold water from the sink, and in the boy's smile. Neighbors began to gather, curious. A woman selling tapioca at the gate asked, unable to hide her surprise, "Lady, aren't you going back to the mansion?" The old woman smiled, a smile full of scars but true. She adjusted the scarf on her head and replied firmly, "I traded the big house for this small one because here, my heart fits. Where there is love, there is space." The murmuring started. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others whispered, some even laughed, as if it were impossible for someone to choose affection over comfort. But the old woman didn't care. The voices of the curious no longer reached the depths of her chest. What mattered was that moment, that choice, that new root sprouting there. Maria, eyes shining, held her hand. There were no words to thank her, only a hand squeeze that spoke more than any sentence could. The boy ran inside, dropped the candies on the table, ran back, and hugged the old woman around her legs. "Grandma, are you going to stay forever now?" he asked, his small voice full of hope. The old woman slowly knelt down, held his face in her trembling hands, and said, "As long as God allows, my son, and even after, I'll stay in every corner of this house, in the smell of porridge, in the circle songs, in the wind that passes through this door." Maria couldn't hold it anymore. She let the tears flow, without shame, without hurry. She felt her chest open, as if finally she could breathe after years of drowning. It was as if life itself whispered in silence, "See, love is stronger than any wealth." The following days were different. The old woman began to help Maria with everything. Early in the morning, she sat on the doorstep, peeling cassava, watching the boy play with his little car. In the afternoon, she sold little cakes at the gate, chatted with neighbors, told old stories that made the children stop to listen. At night, she sat in the yard, looking at the starry sky, murmuring quiet prayers, grateful for finding a home where she no longer needed to beg for affection. The women of the village started to comment, "That old lady is different. It's like she brought light into Maria's house." And another would reply, "Sometimes we think a good house is a big one, but it's a house with a soul that really makes us live." The boy went to school. With more joy, he came back telling the old woman everything, who listened attentively, laughing at his antics, praising every drawing, every crooked letter in his notebook. He told his friends, "I have a grandma of the heart who teaches me to be strong." Maria, even exhausted from work, came home to a hug, a warm plate of food, a soft word. Little by little, the harshness of her days at the office seemed to lose its strength. What was once only exhaustion turned into fuel, because she knew she had someone to fight for. The old woman, sitting in the yard, would always say, "The world might laugh at our small house, but it doesn't know the wealth that lives here." And so, the house that was once just a poor shelter turned into a living refuge, full of laughter, the smell of cakes, and the sound of songs. The old woman no longer needed imported rugs or fancy curtains. There, each crack in the wall told a story. Each dented pot held a taste of victory on that firm choice. The old woman became a root, and Maria, a flower blooming in the impossible. The boy grew strong, carrying on his shoulders not the weight of poverty, but the lightness of a love no one could ever steal. And throughout the village, the story spread from mouth to mouth like a breath of hope, because everyone saw that, in the end, the greatest wealth wasn't money, but the courage to choose where the heart feels at home. Time went by, but for Edmilson, each day felt longer than the last. The big house, once full of servants, fake laughs, and the clinking of glasses toasting deals, had turned into a tomb of silence. The gate that used to open for important guests and flattering colleagues now creaked empty. The hallways seemed to scream with loneliness. Echoing his steps like a lament, Edmilson paced back and forth, his expensive shoes marking the cold marble. The scent of imported perfumes no longer comforted him. The grand piano in the main room, once a showpiece of status, now collected dust. He looked at the photo of his mother on the wall, an old picture, taken when she still smiled with bright, lively eyes. He would sit on the edge of the enormous bed, holding the pillow, trying to breathe in a scent that no longer existed. He tried to remember the times his mother cradled his head in her lap when he was still a scared little boy. But the more he remembered, the more it hurt, because now he understood that all the gold he carried in his pocket could never pay for the tenderness of a simple caress. Many mornings, Edmilson sent messages to Maria. He offered money, furniture, expensive clothes, anything to get his mother back. He sent bags full of gifts, as if love could be wrapped and delivered. But the old woman returned everything, always sending back a short note. "My place is where I am loved, not where I am displayed." The whole village talked. "Did you see? The doctor now lives alone in that cold mansion." Some shook their heads, others sighed, remembering how life always turns, because the one who once humiliated, today harvested only silence for company. Meanwhile, Maria kept working at the office, but she was no longer the same. She walked with her head high, her step steady. Her co-workers now looked at her with new respect, perhaps even shame. They knew that, even after being called useless so many times, she was the one who took in the boss's mother, who gave love where there had only been harshness. Edmilson avoided her. He rushed through the hallways, slammed doors shut, pretended to be on the phone. He couldn't meet her gaze. Maria, for her part, didn't need to say a single word. Her silence was a mirror that showed him every failure, every cruel word he had spat. At home, life kept pulsing. The old woman sold cakes at the gate. The boy studied more eagerly, and Maria came home exhausted but happy. The walls of that little house, once cold, now held stories, songs, and the sweet smell of freshly baked cake. At night, Edmilson would stand at the mansion window, staring at the closed gate, remembering the days he ignored his mother when she asked to sit by his side, to hear a story, or simply hold his hand. He remembered the times he left her alone at the table while he went off to empty meetings. Now, the The big dining table felt like an island in the middle of the sea, and he, cast away of himself, with every failed attempt to bring his mother back, Edmilson sank deeper into shame. The house grew darker, even with all the lights on. The shine of money could no longer blind him to the truth hammering in his mind. The greatest poverty doesn't live in your pocket, but in an empty soul. One day, Edmilson tried to organize a dinner party, invited a few acquaintances to fill the void, but no one showed up. Some gave excuses, others didn't even answer. In that moment, he realized even his friendships had been bought, fragile as wet paper. He sat alone at the table, the banquet untouched, the expensive wine serving only to reflect his loneliness at the bottom of the glass, while Edmilson drowned in silence. Maria blossomed in the village. The boy was now known as the old woman's grandson of the heart. He received candy from neighbors, helped his grandmother at the gate, learned the cake recipes and the songs she sang patiently. People would stop in front of their small house to listen to the old woman telling stories, giving life advice. Maria listened from the kitchen, smiling quietly. She knew that was the greatest payment anyone could receive, seeing the home become a shelter, seeing souls warm themselves there. Edmilson, meanwhile, roamed the mansion like a ghost. The garden, once full of imported flowers, had turned into tall weeds. The pool, once a gleaming blue, was now a murky mirror of dead leaves. Every detail screamed the neglect he once imposed on his own mother. Thus, day by day, Edmilson's humiliation didn't come from shouts or harsh words. It was a silent punishment, a pain that gnawed from the inside out. Loneliness, his worst enemy, followed him through every hallway, every untouched plate, every cold night dot, and in the village, everyone knew. The man who humiliated the cleaning lady now lived trapped inside his own arrogance, swallowing his shame in silence. Meanwhile, Maria, the woman once called useless, became the living example that simple, humble, and true love is the greatest treasure a person can possess. Time passed, and each day dawned with a different kind of strength in that small house, where the beaten earth floor held secrets and silent victories. The yard, once empty and dry, had turned into a space full of life. The old woman, with her hands firm despite the years, began to plant vegetables, herbs, and a few small flowers. With each seedling she buried, she said a phrase, like a prayer: "Whoever plants with love, harvests twice as much." The boy watched everything with curiosity, holding a small makeshift hoe that his heart-grandmother had fashioned from a piece of wood and an old can. He asked about everything: why the leaf was green, why the beans sprouted so fast, why the mint smelled so strong. The old woman answered with patience. Each explanation was a story, a memory from the past, a lesson that went far beyond the soil. Meanwhile, Maria came home from work later and later, her body tired, her shoulders curved. But as soon as she stepped through the gate, the exhaustion seemed to evaporate. The smell of corn cake, the sound of singing coming from the yard, the boy running to show her what he had planted, all of it healed the wounds that the world insisted on opening. The neighbors began to appear more and more, drawn by the smell of the little cakes the old woman made. She set up a small wooden table at the gate, covered with a colorful cloth, where she sold cakes, herbal tea, and some rapadura sweets that she learned to make with Maria. The table became a meeting point. People came not only to buy but to talk, to hear advice, to share secrets that no one else would listen to. The old woman, with her silent wisdom, listened to everything. Sometimes she replied with a short sentence that echoed deep inside: "The world only hurts those with good souls." Other times, she just smiled, held the neighbor's hand, squeezed it firmly, and that gesture alone was enough. The boy became a faithful helper. He ran to fetch more tea, arranged the coins, wrapped the cakes. With each sale, he celebrated as if he had won a trophy. He was proud to say, "Grandma taught me." The old woman would laugh, stroke his face, and say, "You are my greatest." Harvest. At school, the boy changed. He was no longer the shy child who hid behind others. Now he spoke with shining eyes, presented his schoolwork confidently, shared his grandmother's stories that left his classmates amazed. One day, the teacher called Maria and said, "Your son has a heart bigger than this whole classroom." Maria held back tears, smiled, and replied, "It's his heart-grandmother's legacy." At night, when silence took over the village, Maria sat in the yard, looking at the stars. The old woman, beside her, moved her wooden rosary beads, murmuring, prayers that came from far away, mixed with songs that seemed to rock the sky to sleep. The boy, lying in his grandmother's lap, listened, half asleep, half dreaming. In that yard, more than plants were being born. A strength was growing, a strength only those who know pain and true love can understand. A strength that grows in silence, strengthens in humility, and blooms in gratitude. When Maria looked at the old woman, she saw more than just a woman. She saw an ancient tree, full of scars, but still standing, offering shade and fruit. The boy, without realizing it, was becoming a little man, learning that the value of things isn't in their price, but in the stories they carry. He learned that calloused hands can hold the whole world, that the smile of someone we love heals more than any medicine. The village began to call Maria the mother of courage. People would say, "That woman has a heart big enough for the whole village," and she, shy, would smile, adjust the scarf on her head, and reply, "God gave me courage, and this mother here beside me taught me how to use it." The yard also became a classroom. The old woman sat on a little bench, surrounded by children, telling old stories from when the world was all forest, when they cooked on open fire and danced to the sound of drums. Each word was a seed, each laugh a flower blooming in the children's chests. And so, in that little house, a strength was born so great that it crossed the walls and reached the hearts of everyone passing by on the street. One day, a lady who always bought cakes said, "We come here for food, but we leave carrying soul." Maria understood, in the silence of the nights and the chaos of the days, that the greatest miracle wasn't just saving the old woman from the street, it was turning pain into flowers, humiliation into song, scorn into roots. It was realizing that everything we plant in the yard of life one day returns in the form of a hug. Time, with its river-like patience, carved deeper wrinkles into the old woman's face, but it also drew peace into every corner of that small house. The boy grew quickly, his feet becoming too big for the patched sandals, his eyes turning serious, full of dreams. The entire village watched the transformation of that family, stitched not by blood, but by gestures, silences, and hugs that held the soul together. Meanwhile, in the abandoned mansion, Edmondson spent his days sitting in the armchair in the living room, staring at empty walls. The sound of his mother's footsteps no longer echoed. The smell of simple tea, which he once despised, never returned. The piano remained silent, as if in mourning. He sold part of the company to keep up appearances, but nothing filled the hole growing inside him. Money, once his shield and pride, had become a bitter memory. In Maria's small house, the old woman lived her final years surrounded by love. She woke up to the smell of simple coffee, to the sound of the boys studying aloud, reading lessons clearly so she could hear. The yard was filled with the scent of cake, tea, and fresh leaves. Every afternoon, she sat on a wooden chair at the gate, smiling at passers-by, blessing them with a gentle wave. One evening, after telling the boy yet another old story, the old woman closed her eyes and passed away. She left with a serene face, a light smile, as if falling asleep after a day well lived. Maria held her hand until the last breath, whispering prayers and silently giving thanks. The boy, now a young man, cried as he hugged his heart grandmother, murmuring, "You taught me everything I needed to become a man." The wake was simple but full of people. There were no expensive flowers or empty speeches. Neighbors brought cakes, children held flowers from the yard, old ladies cried into their handkerchiefs. Everyone carried a memory, a phrase, a blessing. There, everyone understood that woman left no inheritance of money, but an invisible treasure worth more than any fortune. After her passing, Maria decided to turn the kitchen into a small cantina, using the recipes and secrets she had learned from the old woman. The entire village supported her. Soon, the gate was crowded with people waiting for warm cakes, stews, and stories told by the stove. The house remained small, but it became the biggest gathering point in the area. The boy grew up, studied hard, graduated, and returned home. On graduation day, he stood at the kitchen door, looked at Maria, and said with a choked voice, "You didn't teach me how to be rich. You taught me how to be human." Maria couldn't hold back her tears. She hugged her son tightly, feeling in that embrace the arms of all the ancestors, of all the mothers who came before her. The village began to call Maria the mother of courage. Children stopped at the gate just to hear a "God bless you." Women came seeking advice, recipes, or comfort. The house became a home for many who had no one else. On a quiet afternoon, Maria was hanging clothes on the line. The sky was clear, a blue that looked hand-painted. The wind made the sheets dance. As if in celebration, Maria stopped, looked up, and took a deep breath. She murmured softly, as if speaking to God, to the old woman, to her late husband, to all the pains that had turned into flowers. Those who plant love harvest a full home, even if it's small. And in that moment, Maria understood, once and for all, that the greatest victory wasn't having money, nor being loudly praised. The greatest victory was having a yard full of living memories, a heart full of stories, and a house that pulsed like a great open heart. Thus, the story of the cleaning lady, who was once humiliated, who took in an old woman she didn't know was the boss's mother, became more than a lesson. It became a silent legacy, passed from mouth to mouth, inspiring those who think it's too late to start over, those who believe kindness is weakness, those who forgot that true wealth lives in what cannot be bought. And in the village, whenever the sun set, someone would always say, "At Maria's house, love doesn't fit just in the heart, it overflows through the gate, invades the street, and fills the world." The end.